The Arizona sun didn't care if you were rich or poor. It beat down on the dusty alley in Prosperity Creek. With the same blistering heat, it showed the sprawling ranch of the man who'd ruined her. Serena Jenkins clutched her daughter's hand. The little fingers were frail, a constant, terrifying reminder of all she had left in this world. Her last coin, a nickel worn smooth by years of worry, had bought them a stale loaf of bread 2 days ago. Now there was nothing, just a gnawing emptiness in their bellies and the dust that coated everything like a second skin, a gritty shroud for their dead dreams. But from the shadows at the end of the alley, a figure watched. He stood silent, unmoving, a ghost against the shimmering heat. He didn't see a beggar. He didn't see a broken woman. He saw a lioness guarding her cub. And in her fierce, desperate love, he saw the answer to a prayer he didn't even know how to speak. The dust in Prosperity Creek was alive. It swirled in the wind, getting into the seams of Serena's worn dress, into her lungs, into the deepest corners of her soul. It had been 6 months since the fever took her husband, Daniel. It took him, their small homestead, and every single hope they had for the future. 6 long months of watching their savings vanish like a puddle in the July sun. Leland Beaumont, the man who held the note on their land, had offered his condolences, but his smile never reached his cold, calculating eyes. He gave her 1 week to get out. "A man's debts follow him to the grave, Serena," he'd said, his voice a silken threat, "and sometimes they linger to haunt the widow." Now she and 7-year-old Leah lived in the shadows of the town they once called home. Their shelter was a lean-to, cobbled together from scavenged planks and a torn canvas sheet, pressed against the back wall of the livery stable. The smell of horse manure and hay was always there, a smell that once meant life and honest work, but now it just meant they were living closer to animals who were better fed than they were. Leah, her face smudged with dirt, her blonde hair matted and dull, coughed. It was a dry, rattling cough that tore at Serena's heart with every single rasp. "Mama, I'm hungry," she whispered, her voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "I know, sweet pea, I know," Serena soothed, pulling a threadbare shawl tighter around her daughter's shoulders. "Let's go see Mr. Peterson at the general store. Maybe he has some day-old bread." It was a walk of shame she'd made a dozen times before. Each step past the town's respectable folk felt like a punch in the gut. The averted eyes, the tight-lipped whispers of the women, the leering gazes of the drifters lounging outside the saloon. It was a gauntlet of misery. Mrs. Gable, the preacher's wife, made a show of crossing the street, pulling her own pristine children away, as if poverty was some kind of contagious disease. Mr. Peterson, a man with a perpetually sour face, was sweeping the boardwalk in front of his store. He stopped and leaned on his broom as Serena and Leah approached. "Nothing for you today, Mrs. Jenkins," he said, before she could even open her mouth. "Gave you credit last week. Business is business." "Please, George," Serena pleaded, her voice cracking. "Just a handful of flour, a few potatoes. My Leah is sick." Peterson glanced at the child. For a split second, a flicker of something human crossed his face. Then it was gone, smothered by practiced indifference. "Everyone's got a story, Serena. Beaumont put the word out. No credit for you. Take it up with him." He turned and went back inside, the bell above his door tinkling a cheerful, mocking farewell. Defeated, Serena led Leah back towards their alley. The hunger was a physical pain now, a hollow ache that made her dizzy. As they passed the saloon, the doors swung open. The sound of a badly played piano and the stench of stale beer spilled onto the street. And there he was. Leland Beaumont stood there, flanked by two of his hired guns. He was a large man, dressed in a tailored suit that seemed ridiculous in the dusty town. It was a symbol of his power and his contempt for everyone beneath him. He tipped his hat, but the gesture was an insult. "Serena, still gracing our town with your presence, I see." His eyes roamed over her, lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. "It doesn't have to be this way," he said, his voice a low purr. "My offer still stands. A woman like you shouldn't be living in the dirt. I have a position for a housekeeper." He let the word hang in the air. And the girl, he added, his gaze flicking to Leah, she could help in the kitchens, earn her keep. The implication was as thick and foul as the air coming from the saloon. He didn't want a housekeeper. He wanted a possession, and Leah would be his leverage to get it. Serena's spine went rigid. She pulled Leah behind her, shielding her daughter with her own body. "We would rather starve," she said, her voice low and trembling with a rage that burned away her hunger. Beaumont chuckled, a low, ugly sound. "Starvation is a slow, painful thing, Serena. Pride don't fill a child's belly. You'll come around." He turned and walked away, his laughter echoing in the oppressive heat. Back in the grim sanctuary of their alley, Serena held Leah tight, rocking her as the child's coughs grew worse. Tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed now streamed down her face, mixing with the grime. This was it, the end of the line. There was nowhere left to turn, no one left to ask. The world had shrunk to this filthy, hopeless corner. As dust began to bleed purple and orange across the sky, casting long shadows that looked like grasping fingers, she became aware of a presence. At the mouth of the alley, a man stood motionless. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his features stark and angular in the fading light. His hair was long and black, held back by a simple leather band. He wore buckskin trousers and a plain cotton shirt, and his feet were clad in soft-soled moccasins that had made no sound on the hard-packed earth. He was Apache. In Prosperity Creek, the Apache were spoken of in fearful whispers. They were ghosts of the hills, blamed for every missing cow or spooked horse. To the townsfolk, they were savages. Serena's heart hammered against her ribs. Fear, sharp and primal, shot through her. She clutched Leah tighter, her throat too tight to scream. But he made no move. He simply watched them, his dark eyes holding an expression she couldn't decipher. It wasn't pity, and it wasn't menace. It was a look of profound, solemn observation. He had a small cloth sack in his hand. He took a single step forward and Serena flinched. He stopped immediately. He placed the sack on the ground. Then slowly, deliberately, he backed away and disappeared into the twilight as silently as he had arrived. For a long moment, Serena didn't move. The silence he left behind was heavier than the one before. Finally, driven by a desperation that overrode her fear, she crept forward. Her trembling fingers untied the sack. Inside were 2 roasted prairie hens, still warm, a handful of dried berries, and a small, intricately woven pouch filled with what looked like medicinal herbs. She carried the food back to her daughter, her mind reeling. She didn't know the man's name. She didn't know why he had helped her. But as she tore off a piece of tender meat and gave it to Leah, watching her daughter eat for the first time in 2 days, a single bewildering thought surfaced through her despair. Someone had seen them, not as a nuisance or an opportunity, but as human beings. And for the first time in a very long time, the crushing weight on her chest felt just a little bit lighter. For 3 nights in a row, the silent offering appeared. A rabbit, cleaned and ready for the fire, a pouch of ground corn, more of the strange, fragrant herbs. The man, Kyle, as she learned his name from a passing tracker who spat it out like a curse, never spoke. He would appear at dusk, a phantom gliding through the twilight, leave his offering, and vanish. He never came close, never intruded. His presence was a respectful distance away, a ghost providing for ghosts. Serena boiled the herbs into a tea, and slowly, miraculously, Leah's terrible cough began to subside. The food filled their bellies and brought a hint of color back to her daughter's pale cheeks. But the charity, as much as it was a lifeline, was also a source of deep unease. She owed a debt to a man she didn't know, a man her entire world had taught her to fear, a man who was watching her. On the 4th evening, he did not leave. He stood at the edge of the alley, the setting sun at his back, turning his silhouette into a formidable wall of shadow. Serena's heart began to race. Leah, sensing her mother's tension, huddled closer. "I need to speak with you," he said. His voice was deeper than she had expected, a low rumble like distant thunder. It held no accent she could place, just a quiet, measured cadence. Serena swallowed, her throat suddenly dry as dust. "Thank you for the food," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "We can't repay you." "I have not asked for repayment," he said, taking a single, deliberate step forward into the dim light. Now she could see his face more clearly. It was a strong face, carved by sun and wind, with high cheekbones and eyes so dark they seemed to hold the night sky within them. There were lines of sorrow around those eyes. She saw a shared geography of grief that she recognized instantly. "My name is Kyle," he said. "My people live in the canyons, 2 days' ride from here. I have a homestead of my own closer, near the Black Creek." She waited, unsure what to say. The townsfolk were wary in the daylight. At night, they locked their doors. A white woman talking to an Apache man in a dark alley was a scene that could get them both killed. He seemed to understand her fear. "I do not wish you harm. I have watched you. I see how you protect your child." He paused, and his gaze was direct, unwavering. "I lost my wife 2 winters ago. The white man's sickness took her. She left me with a daughter. Her name is Nita. She is the same age as yours." Serena's breath caught in her chest. She saw it then, the deep, abiding grief in his eyes. It was the same hollow ache she carried in her own soul. He wasn't just a fearsome Apache. He was a widower, a father. He was just like her. "Nita has a home," he continued, his voice steady. "Food in her belly, a warm fire. I teach her the ways of our people, how to be strong and how to survive. But there is a part of her spirit that I cannot heal." His voice was heavy with a father's pain. "A child needs more than a father can give. She needs a mother's hands to braid her hair, a mother's voice to sing her to sleep." He took another slow step forward, his hands held open at his sides, a gesture of peace. "I have watched you with your Leah. In your eyes, I see the same fierce heart that beat in my wife's chest. I see you starve so your daughter can eat. I see you shield her from a world that wants to crush you both." His gaze fell to Leah, who peeked out from behind Serena's skirt with wide, curious eyes. "Your daughter," he said, his voice softening almost imperceptibly, "needs a home, a place to be safe from men like Beaumont, in a town that despises her for being poor." He then looked directly at Serena, and the words he spoke next landed with the force of a physical blow, shattering the reality of her desperate world. "And my daughter needs a mother." Serena just stared at him, dumbfounded. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The crickets, the distant piano, the very air itself seemed to go silent, waiting for her response. He couldn't possibly mean what she thought he meant. It was insane. It was unthinkable. "What? What are you saying?" she stammered, the words catching in her throat. "I am proposing a trade," he said. His tone was pragmatic, devoid of romance or sentiment. It was the sound of a man stating a fact, a business arrangement. "I will give you and your child a home. I will protect you. I will provide for you. You will never be hungry or cold again. Men like Beaumont will never touch you." He paused, letting the weight of his offer settle in the space between them. The promise of everything she had lost, everything she desperately needed. "In return," he finished, his voice unwavering, "you will be a mother to my Nita. You will care for her as you care for your own. You will teach her the things a woman teaches a daughter. You will give her the part of a family that I cannot." He was proposing marriage, not a marriage of love or passion, but a contract, a business arrangement between two desperate parents from two different worlds, forged in the crucible of their shared grief. Serena's mind reeled. The sheer audacity of it, the impossibility of it. Marry an Apache, live among them. The town wouldn't just shun her. They would brand her a traitor, a squaw, something less than human. She would be an outcast from her own people forever. "No," she breathed, shaking her head as if to clear it. "No, it's impossible. I can't." "Why?" Kyle asked. The question was simple, direct, cutting straight through her panic. "Because, because my skin is not the same color as yours. Because you pray to the spirits of the earth and not to the man on the cross. These things do not matter when a child is hungry," he stated, his voice calm and solid as a rock. "They do not matter when a child is alone." "The world won't see it that way," she whispered, her voice choked with the terror of the idea. "They will destroy us, both of us." This town is not the world, Kyle countered, his voice firm. It is a cage, and you are dying in it. I am offering you a key. His words hit her like a physical blow. He was right. The life I offer will not be easy, he admitted. My people may not accept you. Your people will certainly hate you, but your daughter will be safe. She will have a home, and my daughter will have a mother. He looked at her, his dark eyes searching hers, demanding she see past the fear, past the prejudice, to the raw, undeniable truth of their situation. Think on it, he said. And then he turned and melted back into the shadows, leaving Serena trembling in the alley. The weight of his unthinkable, impossible, terrifying proposal pressing down on her like the vast star-filled sky. It was a proposal that offered everything she desperately needed and demanded everything she was. The proposal haunted her. During the day, walking through the hateful stairs of the town, the absurdity of it was stark. She was Serena Jenkins, Daniel's widow, a God-fearing woman from Missouri. The idea of binding her life to a man like Kyle was a violation of every rule, every belief she had ever known. But at night, when Leah coughed in her sleep and the cold seeped through their thin blankets, Kyle's words returned. They weren't a shocking proposal anymore. They were a sliver of light in an endless dark. Your daughter needs a home. Leland Beaumont, however, was not a patient man. 2 days after Kyle's proposal, he cornered her behind the mercantile. His massive bulk blocked the alley's exit. His cologne was a sickeningly sweet miasma in the stale air. Serena, my patience is wearing thin, he said, his smile a predatory baring of teeth. The town council is talking about vagrancy. They might deem you an unfit mother. A child like Leah, she could be taken, made a ward of the county, sent to an orphanage back east. The threat hit her like a fist to the stomach, knocking the air from her lungs. An orphanage. The thought was more terrifying than starvation. They would be separated. Leah, her Leah, raised by strangers in some cold, heartless institution. You wouldn't, Serena breathed, her body trembling. Oh, I would, Beaumont purred, stepping closer. But it doesn't have to be that way. A simple yes from you changes everything. A warm bed, good food, pretty dresses for the girl. He reached out his thick fingers, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. Serena recoiled as if she'd been burned. His eyes narrowed into slits. Don't be a fool, Serena. There's no one coming to save you. His words were meant to crush her, but they had the opposite effect. They ignited a spark of defiance that had been buried under months of despair. There's no one coming to save you, but someone had offered. Not salvation, perhaps, but an escape. That afternoon, driven by a fear that now outweighed every prejudice she held, Serena made a decision. She left Leah in the care of Martha, a kind-hearted elderly laundress who sometimes slipped them scraps, and walked out of town. She followed the faint trail that led towards Black Creek. She found Kyle's homestead nestled in a small, hidden valley, shielded by cottonwoods and a ridge of red rock. It wasn't a teepee or a crude shelter, as she might have imagined. It was a sturdy, well-built cabin of adobe and timber, with a corral holding two strong-looking horses and a small, flourishing garden of corn, squash, and beans. Smoke curled lazily from a stone chimney. It was peaceful. It was a home. Kyle was skinning a deer by the creek, his movements efficient and precise. He looked up as she approached, his expression unreadable. He simply nodded and wiped his bloody hands on a cloth. From the cabin's doorway, a small face peeked out. A little girl with her father's dark eyes and hair braided into two neat plaits. This was Nita. She watched Serena with a grave, cautious curiosity, clutching a small doll made from corn husks. You came, Kyle stated. It wasn't a question. I... I had to see, Serena stammered, her gaze fixed on the little girl. Kyle said something to his daughter in the Apache language, his voice soft and encouraging. Nita hesitated for a moment, then slowly she walked towards Serena. She stopped a few feet away, her eyes wide. Serena's heart ached. This child had no mother. She knelt down, trying to make herself seem less intimidating. Hello, Nita, she said softly. That's a beautiful doll. Nita looked down at the doll in her hands, then back at Serena. She took a tentative step forward and held it out. An offering. A gesture of peace. Serena's eyes filled with tears. She gently took the doll, admiring the simple craftsmanship. "Did you make her?" Nita gave a shy, single nod. At that moment, Leah's face flashed in Serena's mind. She imagined her daughter here, playing with Nita by the creek, their laughter echoing in the quiet valley. She imagined Leah with a full belly and warm clothes, sleeping safely in that sturdy cabin, far from the leering eyes of Leland Beaumont. Kyle watched the silent exchange, his stern face softened by a flicker of hope. "She is a good girl," he said quietly, "but she is lonely." Serena stayed for an hour. She didn't agree to his proposal. Not yet. But when she left, the idea was no longer impossible. It was a seed of hope, planted in the barren soil of her desperation. Her return to Prosperity Creek was a brutal plunge back into reality. Word of her visit to the Savages camp had spread like wildfire. Perhaps one of Beaumont's men had followed her. The shunning was no longer passive. It was active, hostile. "Indian lover," a man hissed as she passed the blacksmith's forge. Mrs. Gable, the preacher's wife, stood on the steps of the church as Serena walked by and made a loud pronouncement to the women with her. "When a woman forsakes her own kind and her Christian decency, she is lower than the beasts of the field. She puts her own child's soul in mortal peril." The words were like stones, and they found their mark. Serena hurried away, her face burning with shame and fury. But the worst was yet to come. She arrived back at the alley to find their lean-to smashed to pieces. Their meager belongings, a spare blanket, Daniel's old tin cup, Leah's one threadbare doll, were scattered and trampled in the dirt. Leah was huddled with old Martha, sobbing. "Mr. Beaumont's men did it, Serena," the laundress whispered, her eyes full of fear and pity. "They said the town had to be cleaned up." That night, huddled in the back of Martha's laundry shed, listening to Leah's whimpering cries, Serena Jenkins finally broke. The town hadn't just turned its back on her, it had declared war. They would take her daughter. They would grind her into dust under the heel of their righteousness and greed. They had left her with no choice. They had shown her that the true savages were not the ones living in the hills. They were right here in Prosperity Creek, hiding their cruelty behind starched collars and pious pronouncements. Her decision was made. It was no longer about her own fear or what people would think. It was about survival. It was about Leah. Before the sun rose, with Leah wrapped in a borrowed blanket and sleeping in her arms, Serena slipped out of the laundry shed. She didn't look back at the town. It was a tomb, and she was escaping it. Her feet, guided by a desperate new resolve, found the path to Black Creek. She was walking away from the world she knew and towards a future she could not possibly imagine. She was walking towards Kyle's home, ready to accept his unthinkable proposal. The moon was a sliver of bone in the pre-dawn sky as Serena approached Kyle's homestead for the second time. She was exhausted, her arms aching from carrying Leah, but a strange, fierce energy propelled her forward. This was not a visit of curiosity. It was an act of surrender and of defiance. A dog barked, and Kyle emerged from the cabin, a rifle held loosely in his hands. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her, seeing the sleeping child in her arms, and the desperate resolve etched onto her face. He lowered the rifle and waited. "They destroyed our shelter," Serena said, her voice raw. "They threatened to take my daughter." She looked at him, her blue eyes pleading in the pale light. "Your offer, if it still stands, I accept." Kyle's stoic expression did not change, but a deep, solemn understanding passed through his eyes. He nodded once, a gesture that sealed the monumental decision. He took Leah from her arms, his touch surprisingly gentle, and carried the sleeping child into the cabin. Serena followed him over the threshold, leaving her old life behind in the dust. Inside the cabin was a single large room, impeccably clean and orderly. A fire glowed in the stone hearth, casting a warm, flickering light on the simple, functional furniture. Nita was asleep on a small cot in the corner, bundled under a thick fur blanket. Kyle laid Leah down on his own bed, a sturdy frame built against the far wall, and gently pulled a wool blanket over her. He then turned to Serena. There was no celebration, no triumph in his demeanor. This was the consummation of a serious pact, and he treated it with the gravity it deserved. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a small wooden table. He stoked the fire, put a pot of coffee on to brew, and sat opposite her. The silence between them was not awkward, but heavy with unspoken truths. They were two strangers from warring cultures, about to bind their lives together for the sake of their children. There must be rules, Serena said, finally finding her voice, and understanding. That is wise, Kyle nodded. The children, she began, Leah and Nita. They come first, in all things. Their safety, their well-being. That is why we are doing this. It is the only reason, he agreed. I will be a mother to your daughter, Serena continued, her voice gaining strength. I will care for her, tend to her hurts, teach her what I know. I will love her as my own. But you must understand, I am not her mother. I will not try to replace the woman you lost. A flicker of pain crossed Kyle's face, so quick she almost missed it. Her mother's spirit walks in the evening sun. No one can be replaced. I ask only that you fill the empty spaces in Nita's life, as I will try to fill them in your daughter's. And you and I, she said, bracing herself for the most difficult part. This is a partnership, a home for my daughter, a mother for yours. I will cook your meals. I will mend your clothes. I will keep your house. I will be your wife in name and in the eyes of anyone who would seek to harm this family. But my heart is buried with my Daniel. I cannot offer you affection. She could not bring herself to say the word love. It felt like a betrayal. Kyle listened, his gaze steady and intense. He considered her words for a long moment before he spoke. My heart too has its own grave, he said, his voice low. I do not ask for your affection, Serena. I ask for your respect, and I will give you mine. I will not demand a husband's rights. This will be a marriage of duty. Our duty is to them. He gestured towards the sleeping children. Perhaps in time, friendship may grow. For now, respect and duty are enough. Serena felt a wave of relief so profound, it almost made her weep. He understood. He was not the savage of the town's imagination. He was a man of honor, bound by a grief as deep as her own. One more thing, Kyle said. You will be safe here from the white men. But my people, some will not understand this. They will see you as an enemy. You must be patient. You must be strong. Do not show them fear. I have no fear left, Serena replied, and she realized it was the truth. Beaumont and the town had burned it all away. There was no preacher, no church, no paper to sign. Their wedding ceremony was the quiet agreement made over a wooden table in the dark hour before dawn. It was a vow spoken not of love and honor, but of survival and protection. It was a promise made not to each other, but to the two little girls sleeping peacefully a few feet away, oblivious to the monumental pact being forged on their behalf. When the sun rose, casting golden light through the cabin's single window, Leah and Nita awoke. Leah sat up, confused, her eyes wide as she took in the strange room. Nita peered over from her cot, equally curious. Serena went to her daughter's side. It's all right, sweet pea, she whispered, stroking her hair. This is our new home. Kyle spoke softly to Nita and Apache, and the little girl slid off her cot. She walked over to the bed where Leah sat, and once again, held out her cornhusk doll. Leah, her initial fear giving way to a child's natural curiosity, reached out and gently touched the doll's yarn hair. In that small, silent gesture between two motherless girls, the new family had its true beginning. It wasn't a family born of love, but of necessity, a fragile, unlikely alliance against a hostile world. But as Serena watched them, a spark of something she hadn't felt in a very long time ignited within her. The fragile, flickering warmth of hope. The first few weeks were a delicate dance. Two strangers sharing a small space, trying to build a life. The cabin, which had seemed a fortress when she arrived, now felt confining at times. It was filled with the ghosts of two dead spouses and the awkwardness of two living ones. Serena and Kyle circled each other. Their conversations were brief, practical, focused on the tasks of the day or the needs of the children. The wood is low. I saw deer tracks by the ridge. Leah needs new shoes. Serena threw herself into her side of the bargain with a fierce determination. She learned the rhythm of this new life. so different from the one she'd known. She learned to grind corn with a stone mano and metate, her arms aching with the unfamiliar labor. She learned from Kyle which wild plants were for medicine and which for stew. He taught her to read the sky for weather and the earth for tracks. He was a patient teacher, his instructions concise and clear. In turn, she brought a different kind of order to the cabin. She scrubbed the floors until they shone. She mended the children's clothes with neat, careful stitches. She sang old lullabies from her own childhood that made both Leah and Nita fall asleep. She discovered Nita had a quiet, artistic soul and taught her how to make charcoal pencils for drawing on scraps of leather. She taught both girls to read a few simple words from the worn Bible she had managed to salvage, the only remaining link to her past life. The bridge between the two fractured halves of the family was, as they had known it would be, the children. Leah, resilient and starved for companionship, quickly attached herself to the quiet, gentle Nita. They became inseparable, developing their own secret language of gestures and whispers. They explored the creek together, hunted for pretty stones, and shared secrets under the shade of the cottonwoods. Their easy affection and shared laughter began to slowly, imperceptibly, chip away at the wall of formality between the adults. One evening, Serena was trying to braid Nita's thick black hair. Her fingers, used to Leah's fine blonde locks, were clumsy and awkward. Nita sat patiently, but Serena could feel her own frustration mounting. Kyle, who had been oiling a saddle by the fire, rose and came to stand behind them. "Here," he said quietly. He gently took the strands of hair from Serena's hands. His large calloused fingers, which she had only seen handle a knife or a rifle, were surprisingly nimble and gentle. He expertly wove the hair into a perfect tight braid, his knuckles brushing against Serena's as he worked. The unexpected touch was like a spark of lightning. Serena pulled her hands away quickly, her heart skipping a beat. Kyle finished the braid without a word and returned to his seat, but the brief moment of contact lingered in the air between them. A silent acknowledgement that they were more than just business partners. The outside world, however, did not forget them. A week after her arrival, they had a visitor. A tall, severe-looking Apache man with a deep scar running through his eyebrow rode into their valley. "His name is Churak," Kyle explained in a low voice, "a respected elder, and a man who holds fiercely to the old ways." Churak dismounted and ignored Serena completely. His eyes were like chips of obsidian. He spoke to Kyle in rapid Apache, his tone sharp and disapproving. Serena couldn't understand the words, but she could feel the venom in them. She saw him gesture towards her with contempt. Kyle's replies were low and firm. He stood his ground, his body language unyielding. The argument grew heated, their voices rising in the quiet valley. Finally, Churak spat on the ground near Serena's feet, mounted his horse and rode away. The silence he left behind was heavy and foreboding. "He does not approve," Serena stated quietly. It wasn't a question. "Churak sees the world in black and white," Kyle said, his jaw tight. "White men are the enemy who took our lands and brought disease. He sees you as one of them. He believes I have betrayed our people by bringing you here." "Does he speak for the others?" she asked, a knot of fear tightening in her stomach. "He speaks for many," Kyle admitted. "They see your people slaughter the buffalo, steal our sacred lands, and lie with every treaty. They have no reason to trust you." The prejudice she had fled in Prosperity Creek had found her here, just wearing a different face. She was an outsider once again, but the threat from her own people was more direct. A few weeks later, Kyle and Serena rode toward the mountains to check his trap lines, leaving the girls playing near the cabin. From a high ridge, they saw riders below. It was Sheriff Brody and Leland Beaumont and two of his men. They were not on the main trail. They were actively searching, their horses trampling through the brush. "They are hunting," Kyle said, his voice grim. "For you." Serena's blood ran cold. "What will they do if they find us?" "Beaumont will not let you go. A man like that cannot stand to lose. He will claim I kidnapped you. He will use the law to take you back and to hang me." Kyle's hand rested on the stock of his rifle. "We must be more careful. You cannot be seen." The homestead, once a sanctuary, now felt like a gilded cage. Serena was trapped between two worlds belonging to neither. Hated by the people she had left, and distrusted by the people she had joined. The only true citizens of their tiny, fragile nation were the two little girls who saw each other not as white or Apache, but simply as sisters. That evening, as Serena watched Leah and Nita chasing fireflies by the creek, their giggles echoing in the twilight, a fierce wave of protectiveness washed over her. The world could hate her. Both worlds could. It didn't matter. This little valley, this strange, quiet man, this patchwork family, it was all she had. And she would fight for it with the last breath in her body. The respect and duty she had promised Kyle were beginning to forge themselves into something stronger, something more akin to loyalty. She was no longer just Serena Jenkins, Daniel's widow. She was Kyle's wife, Nita's mother, and the guardian of this fragile peace. The late autumn air grew crisp, and the cottonwoods along Black Creek turned a brilliant, defiant gold. A fragile domesticity had settled over the cabin. Serena and Kyle had found a rhythm, a way of coexisting that bordered on a quiet companionship. He would leave a striking wildflower on the table for her in the morning. She would ensure a hot meal was ready for him, no matter how late he returned from a hunt. They rarely spoke of their past, but they had begun to build a shared present, its foundation laid by the inseparable bond of their daughters. Leland Beaumont, however, was not a man to accept defeat. His public humiliation at Serena's disappearance had curdled into a venomous obsession. He couldn't storm the Apache lands to retrieve her without starting a war the army didn't want. But his spies watched and waited. He needed leverage. He needed a way to destroy Kyle and drag Serena back under his control. And his cunning mind finally found it. Not in Serena, but in the very earth that had once belonged to her. You see, Beaumont hadn't wanted the Jenkins plot simply for grazing land. He had long suspected, based on geological formations and rumors from old prospectors, that the creek running through it carried more than just water. He had his men discreetly survey the property after Serena was gone, and their discovery made his greedy heart pound. A thin but rich vein of silver ore. It lay hidden in a rocky outcrop not 50 yards from where Daniel Jenkins had built his home. It wasn't a mother lode, but it was enough to make a man very, very wealthy. The land, however, was still technically in Daniel Jenkins' name. Foreclosing on the debt gave Beaumont control, but a direct claim on mineral rights could be messy. If Serena were to reappear with a savvy lawyer, she might have a claim. He needed her either under his thumb or gone permanently, and Kyle was the obstacle. Beaumont's plan was insidious. He knew the simmering tensions between the ranchers and the Apache. All it took was a single spark to start a firestorm. One moonless night, two of Beaumont's men cut the fences at the edge of his vast ranch, driving a dozen steers into the broken hills that bordered Apache territory. The next morning, Beaumont rode into Prosperity Creek, his face a mask of righteous fury. "They've done it again!" he roared in the saloon, ensuring everyone could hear. "The Apache thieves! A dozen head of my best cattle gone. I found the tracks leading straight towards the canyons. And this?" He slammed a single object down on the bar. It was an arrow, beautifully fletched with a distinctive hawk feather, its flint head expertly napped. It was unmistakably of Apache make. Sheriff Brody, a man whose salary was unofficially supplemented by Beaumont's generosity, picked up the arrow. "This is Kyle's make," he said, his voice heavy with false gravity. "Seen his arrows before. No doubt about it." The lie was seamless. The arrow had been purchased weeks ago from a drunken half-breed trader, but the seed was planted. Fear and hatred, always simmering just below the surface in Prosperity Creek, began to boil over. A few days later, the trap was sprung. Kyle had ridden closer to town than usual, tracking a mountain lion that had been preying on the deer population. He was focused, moving silently through the scrub oak when the crack of a rifle echoed through the canyon. It wasn't aimed at him. A moment later, he heard the bellow of a dying steer. He crept forward, his senses on high alert. Below him, in a small clearing, lay one of Beaumont's steers, a fresh bullet hole in its side. Standing over it were two of Beaumont's ranch hands. As Kyle watched from the rocks above, they pulled an arrow, another one of the purchase fakes, and plunged it into the animal's flank. He understood instantly. It was a setup. He began to back away, his moccasins making no sound, but it was too late. There he is, the thieving savage! Sheriff Brody and a posse of 6 men, Beaumont among them, burst from the trees, their guns drawn. They had been waiting. "Don't move, Kyle," Brody shouted. "You're under arrest for cattle rustling." Kyle stood his ground, his face a granite mask. He held his empty hands up slowly. "This is a trick," he said, his voice calm and even. "I didn't kill this animal." "Tell it to the judge," Beaumont sneered, his eyes glittering with triumph as he looked at Kyle. "Though in these parts, we usually find a rope is quicker." They bound his hands and dragged him back to Prosperity Creek. He was paraded down the main street, the townsfolk jeering and throwing stones. Back at the homestead, Serena knew nothing. She began to worry as the sun set and he did not return. Her worry turned to a cold, gnawing fear as the moon rose high in the sky and the cabin remained empty, save for her and the 2 sleeping girls. The next morning, an old Apache man named Taza, a friend of Kyle's family, rode hard into the valley. His face was grim. "They have taken him," he said to Serena, foregoing any greeting. "The white sheriff. They say he stole cattle. The rancher Beaumont is calling for a hanging." Serena's world tilted and threatened to collapse. Beaumont. It was his doing. She knew it with a certainty that was absolute. This wasn't about cattle. It was about her. It was his revenge. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. Her first instinct was to run, to take the girls and flee deeper into the mountains. But then she looked at Nita's sleeping face, so much like her father's. She looked at Leah, who had finally found a safe home. Running would not save them. Beaumont would hunt them forever. The only way out was through. The helpless widow who had huddled in an alley was gone. In her place was a woman who had learned to survive, a wife, a mother to 2. Kyle had honored his word to her. He had protected her. Now it was her turn to fight for him. "I have to go to the town," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. Taza looked at her, his old eyes skeptical. "They will not listen to you. You are a white woman, but you are his woman now. To them, you are worse than nothing." "I don't care," Serena said, her jaw set. "He is innocent. Beaumont has framed him. There has to be a way to prove it." But how? It was her word against the wealthiest, most powerful man in the county. As she frantically searched her mind for a plan, a memory sparked. A memory of her husband, Daniel. He had been a meticulous man. He kept a journal, noting everything, the weather, the price of seed, his daily struggles, and he had been prospecting in the creek behind their old house. He was always convinced there was something more to that land than just dirt and rock. The journal. It was in an old wooden chest, one of the few things she'd managed to bring with her from the homestead before Beaumont threw her out. She had stored it with Martha, the laundress. It was a long shot, a desperate prayer, but it was the only thing she had. Perhaps in the scribbled pages of a dead man's thoughts lay the key to saving a living one. Leaving the girls in the care of Taza's wife, Serena rode one of Kyle's horses towards Prosperity Creek. She did not ride with the bowed head of a victim, but with the focused fury of a woman on a mission. She avoided the main road, circling around and entering the town from the south, tethering her horse in the alley behind Martha's laundry. The old woman gasped when she saw her. "Child, what are you doing here? The whole town's in an uproar. They're going to hang that man of yours tomorrow at dawn." "That's why I'm here, Martha," Serena said, her voice tight with urgency. "I need my husband's chest, the small one, with his books." Martha led her to a back room and pulled the dusty chest from under a pile of linens. With trembling hands, Serena lifted the lid. Inside, beneath a layer of Daniel's old shirts, was the leather-bound journal. She began to flip through the pages, her heart pounding against her ribs. The entries were mundane at first, crop prices, weather patterns. But then she found it. October 12th. Found something in the creek bed, a heavy, dark rock with a silver-like sheen. Broke a piece off. It's heavier than it should be. Must investigate further. A few pages later, another entry. November 3rd. Rode to Prescott and paid the assayer. He was shocked. It's high-grade silver ore. Not a huge vein, he thinks, but rich. Enough to change everything. "I dare not tell anyone, especially not Beaumont. He watches this land like a hawk. I hid the assay report and the best samples in the false bottom of this chest. If anything happens to me, his words trailed off. The fever had taken him before he could do anything more. Serena's hands shook as she felt along the inside of the chest. A small groove, a loose panel. She pried it open. Inside was a folded, official-looking document, the assay report, and several small, heavy, dark rocks. It was the proof, the motive, the truth. This was never about cattle. It was about greed. Her plan formed, desperate and dangerous. She couldn't go to Sheriff Brody. He was Beaumont's puppet. She had to go to the people, to the court of public opinion, fickle and cruel as it was. Kyle was being held in the small stone jailhouse. Through the barred window, she could see his silhouette. He stood tall and straight, betraying no fear. Her heart ached for him, for his quiet strength and his unwavering honor. She waited until dusk, when the saloon would be full. It was the town's dark heart, the place where news was made and opinions were forged. Taking a deep breath, she tucked the assay report in one of the silver rocks into her pocket, pulled her shawl tightly around her, and walked through the swinging doors. The saloon fell silent. The piano player's hands froze over the keys. Every single eye turned to her. There she was, the traitor, the Indian squaw. Leland Beaumont was at the bar, holding court, basking in his victory. He turned, and a slow, triumphant smile spread across his face when he saw her. Well, well, look what the cat dragged in. Come crawling back, Serena. It's too late for your savage. Serena ignored him. She walked to the center of the room, her gaze sweeping over the faces of the men she had once considered her neighbors. You all know me, she began, her voice clearer and stronger than she'd ever imagined it could be. You know I was Daniel Jenkins's wife, and you know that this man, she pointed a shaking finger at Beaumont, took our land when he died. He owed me money, Beaumont scoffed. It was a legal foreclosure. Was it just the land you wanted, Leland? Serena challenged, her voice rising. Or was it what was in the land? She strode to the bar, pulled the silver ore from her pocket, and slammed it down. The heavy rock made a loud crack against the wood. This came from the creek on my husband's land. He found a vein of silver there. A murmur went through the crowd. Men leaned forward, their eyes wide. That's a lie, Beaumont blustered, his face beginning to pale. Is it? Serena shot back, pulling the folded document from her pocket. Then I suppose this assay report from Prescott is a lie too. It states in no uncertain terms that the land is rich with silver. Land you now control. Land you wanted all along. She held up the paper, her hands steady as a rock. My husband knew you were watching him. He wrote it in his journal. He knew you were greedy, but he never could have imagined this. That you would frame an innocent man for cattle rustling just to get me out of the way, just to secure your claim. The pieces were clicking into place in the minds of the onlookers. The sudden foreclosure, Beaumont's obsession with Serena, the convenient theft. It all made a sickening kind of sense. She's hysterical, Beaumont roared, but his voice held a tremor of panic. The woman's been living with a savage. She's lost her mind. The only savage I see in this room, Serena said, her voice dropping to a low, cold fury, is you, a man who would condemn another to the gallows for a piece of shiny rock. A man who would use a woman's grief and a child's welfare as a weapon. Beaumont, seeing the tide of opinion turning against him, lost control. His face contorted in a mask of rage. You stupid woman, he screamed, lunging for her. I'll kill you. He never made it. A figure stepped out from the corner of the room, blocking his path. It was Deputy Miller, a young, quiet man who had always been in Brody's shadow. That's enough, Mr. Beaumont, he said, his hand on his pistol. At that exact moment, the saloon doors swung open again. Standing there, silhouetted against the night, were a dozen Apache warriors, led by the stern-faced Churak. They were not painted for war. They carried rifles, but held them non-threateningly. They had come not to fight, but to bear witness, to support the man Churak had once scorned. Taza had ridden to them, had told them of the white woman's courage, of her fight for one of their own. Churak's cold eyes met Serena's across the room, and in them, she saw a flicker of something new. Respect. The sight of the Apache warriors broke Beaumont, trapped between a deputy who had finally found his conscience and a silent jury of his own people. His bluster crumbled. Sheriff Brody, seeing his benefactor's power evaporate, tried to slip out the back, but was stopped by two grim-faced ranchers. The game was over. Leland Beaumont's reign of terror in Prosperity Creek had ended, not with a barrage of bullets, but with a woman's desperate courage in a dead man's words. Deputy Miller took the keys from a protesting Brody and walked to the jailhouse. Minutes later, Kyle emerged a free man. He walked directly to the saloon. The crowd parted for him. He stopped in front of Serena, his dark eyes searching her face. He saw no fear, no regret, only strength. Without a word, he reached out and took her hand. His touch was firm, warm, and possessive. In front of the entire town, in front of his own people, he claimed her, not as part of a bargain, but as his wife. Together, they walked out of the saloon and into the cool night air, leaving the wreckage of their old lives behind them forever. And so, a bargain born of desperation was reforged by courage into a true family. Serena and Kyle returned to their valley not as strangers bound by a contract, but as partners whose mutual respect had blossomed into a quiet, powerful love. Having earned the admiration of the Apache, Serena watched her daughter and Nita grow as inseparable sisters, living proof that family is not defined by blood, but by loyalty. Their home became a testament that even in the harshest of lands, the most resilient hope can take root and thrive. If this tale of grit, heart, and the families we choose moved you, please show your support by hitting the like button, sharing this story, and subscribing to our channel for more tales from the Untamed West. Your support helps us keep these legends alive.